It was a dark Friday in Jerusalem. Clouds gathered above Golgotha, awaiting the moment that would split history in two. At the foot of 3 crosses, a Roman centurion was carrying out orders, another crucifixion. This time it was Jesus of Nazareth. His job was clear: make sure Jesus died. And he did exactly that. When the 6th hour came, darkness covered all the land, lasting until the 9th hour. At the 9th hour, Jesus cried out loudly, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Then Jesus, with a loud cry, breathed his last. Suddenly, the temple veil was torn in two from top to bottom. The centurion who stood facing him said, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." On that day, the life of this Roman soldier changed forever. The one charged with overseeing the execution of Jesus was shaken to the very core of his being. He went from being an executioner to a witness, from piercing Jesus's body with a spear to becoming the first Gentile to believe he was indeed the Son of God. He abandoned his high rank within the most powerful empire on earth and joined the followers of Jesus. He carried the word to distant lands, proclaiming the gospel with the zeal of someone who had witnessed everything and whose life had been transformed. Yet his tragic end entered church history under the name now remembered as Longinus. Before that fateful day, Longinus was the embodiment of Roman might, a centurion commanding a century of soldiers with iron discipline and unyielding loyalty. His life was forged in the crucible of war, where courage, cunning, and brutality were the currency of survival. To become a centurion, one needed more than physical prowess. It demanded a sharp mind, strategic brilliance, and an unwavering commitment to Rome's dominion. Longinus excelled in all these. His name is synonymous with authority on the battlefield. His world was one of rigid order, where obedience to the emperor was sacred, and death was merely a tool to maintain control. He had overseen executions without flinching, his heart steeled by years of violence. To him, a crucifixion was just another task, a grim necessity to uphold the empire's grip on its far-flung provinces. Longinus was not just a soldier, he was Rome's will made flesh, a man whose loyalty to Caesar was as unshakable as the legions he served. Yet, as dawn broke over Jerusalem that morning, an unusual restlessness stirred in the city. Whispers of a man named Jesus of Nazareth rippled through the crowded streets, carried on the lips of merchants, priests, and passers-by. The name sparked something unfamiliar in Longinus, a faint unease that tugged at the edges of his disciplined mind. Who was this figure? And why did his presence unsettle even a man hardened by war unbeknownst to Longinus? This day would dismantle everything he believed about power, loyalty, and purpose. The night before had set in motion a chain of betrayal and judgment. As Jesus was seized in the Garden of Gethsemane, betrayed by a kiss from his own disciple, Judas Iscariot, who traded his loyalty for 30 pieces of silver, as Matthew chapter 26 verse 14 states. The arrest was swift and brutal, with torches flickering in the darkness and the clank of soldiers' armor piercing the quiet night. Jesus was dragged before the Sanhedrin, the powerful council of chief priests and elders, who accused him of blasphemy for daring to claim he was the Son of God. In the torchlit chamber, they unleashed their fury, striking him, spitting on his face, and condemning him to death. Their verdict was unanimous, but their authority was limited. Only Rome could sanction an execution. As dawn broke, they marched Jesus, bruised and bloodied, to the palace of Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea. Pilate, seated on his imposing judgment seat, gazed at the prisoner with a mix of curiosity and unease. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. Jesus responded calmly, "You have said so," as Matthew chapter 27 verse 11 confirms. The chief priests and elders unleashed a torrent of accusations: sedition, blasphemy, inciting rebellion, but Jesus stood silent, his silence louder than their shouts. Pilate, a man accustomed to the chaos of Roman governance, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Don't you hear everything they're accusing you of? Aren't you going to defend yourself?" he pressed. Yet Jesus offered no response, not a single word of defense or justification. His composure was unnerving, a stark contrast to the desperate pleas Pilate had heard from countless prisoners. This man's silence spoke of a strength that defied the governor's understanding, planting a seed of doubt in his mind. Was this prisoner more than he appeared? The weight of the moment pressed on Pilate, a seasoned politician caught in a web of religious fervor and political expediency, unsure of how to navigate the growing storm. As the trial reached a critical juncture, a messenger burst into the hall, breathless, delivering an urgent message from Pilate's wife. "Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much over him today in a dream," according to Matthew chapter 27, verse 19. The warning sent a chill through Pilate, who shifted uncomfortably on his seat. He sensed a force beyond his control, a divine current pulling him into events larger than his governorship. The Passover festival offered a customary release of one prisoner, and Pilate saw an opportunity to extricate himself from this dilemma. He presented the crowd with a choice: Jesus, the quiet teacher from Nazareth, or Barabbas, a notorious criminal known for murder and rebellion, as Matthew chapter 27 verse 16 confirms. Surely, he thought, the people would choose the harmless preacher over a dangerous outlaw, but the chief priests and religious leaders, skilled in manipulation, stirred the crowd into a frenzy. "Release Barabbas," they shouted, their voices rising like a tide. Pilate, desperate to maintain order, raised his hands and called out, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" As Matthew chapter 27 verse 22 states, the response was a deafening roar: "Crucify him!" Pilate's unease grew. He pressed again. "Why? What evil has he done?" according to Matthew chapter 27 verse 23. But the crowd's fury only intensified, their chants of crucify him," drowning out reason. Pilate, a man who wielded Rome's authority, found himself powerless against the mob's rage. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could feel the eyes of the crowd, the priests, and even the silent Jesus boring into him. In a final act of defiance against his own misgivings, he called for a basin of water and washed his hands before the multitude, proclaiming, "I am innocent of this man's blood, see to it yourselves," as Matthew chapter 27 verse 24 records. With that, he released Barabbas and delivered Jesus to be crucified. The fate of the Son of God was sealed, and the stage was set for a sacrifice that would echo through the ages. The soldiers escorted Jesus into the praetorium, where Longinus stood sentinel at the entrance, his presence as unyielding as ever. He had overseen dozens of punishments, each one a grim routine of Roman justice. He had watched men scream, beg, and break under the lash, their bodies crumpling under the weight of their fate. But today, an inexplicable unease settled over him. The prisoner before them was different. Jesus offered no resistance, no cries of defiance or pleas for mercy. He endured each moment with a quiet resolve, as if he knew every blow was part of a greater purpose. The soldiers, reveling in their cruelty, stripped him of his garments, exposing his body to the cold stone of the praetorium. They bound him tightly to a pillar, the ropes cutting into his flesh, and began to whip him with a scourge designed to tear skin and muscle. The lash fell again and again, each strike echoing in the courtyard, blood pooling at his feet. Yet Jesus remained silent, his face betraying no hatred, only a profound endurance that unsettled the watching centurion. Longinus stood with arms crossed, his face carved by years of witnessing violence, but a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. Why did this man not cry out? Why did he bear such brutality with such dignity? The soldiers, emboldened by his silence, escalated their mockery. They draped a purple robe over his lacerated shoulders, a cruel parody of royalty. They twisted thorny branches into a jagged crown and pressed it cruelly onto his head, blood streaming down his face, staining his skin. They thrust a stick into his hands, mimicking a scepter, and knelt in mock reverence, jeering. "Hail, King of the Jews," as Matthew chapter 27 verse 28 confirms. Their laughter filled the air, a cacophony of scorn, but Longinus stood apart, his silence a stark contrast to their cruelty. He watched, and for the first time in years, he felt a pang of unease not from the familiar brutality, but from the unshakable dignity of this man. The soldiers spat on Jesus, struck his head repeatedly with the stick, each blow driving the thorns deeper. When they grew bored of their sadistic game, they ripped the robe from his torn flesh, causing fresh waves of pain, and dressed him in his own clothes, now stained with blood. They prepared him for crucifixion, but Longinus could not tear his eyes away. Something deep within him, long dormant, began to stir. He couldn't comprehend why this man refused to defend himself, why his face showed no trace of hatred, only a compassion that seemed to pierce the centurion's hardened heart. As the soldiers laughed, Longinus's mind churned with questions. Who was this man? Truly, what power allowed him to endure such torment with such grace? He didn't yet understand. But soon he would witness an act of love so profound it would reshape his very existence. The soldiers seized Jesus, thrusting him out of the praetorium, and placed a rough-hewn, blood-stained cross on his shoulders, its weight a brutal burden for his already weakened body. The grim procession to Golgotha began, a march through the dusty streets of Jerusalem. Longinus led the way, his commanding presence parting the swelling crowd. His duty was clear: escort the prisoner to the place of execution.
Golgotha, known as the Hill of Skulls, was a desolate outcrop where Rome dispatched those it deemed expendable. The air was thick with tension as Jesus staggered forward, the cross digging into his torn flesh. The crowd pressed in, a chaotic mix of anger and sorrow. Some spat on him, their faces twisted with contempt. Others hurled insults, their words sharp as daggers. Yet among them were those who wept silently, their grief a quiet counterpoint to the mob's rage. In the midst of the throng, Mary, Jesus' mother, pushed forward, her eyes frantically searching for her son, unable to find him in the chaos. She turned to the disciple John, her voice trembling with desperation. "John, help me. Take me to my son." Together, they fought through the crowd, their hearts heavy with anguish. Suddenly, a soldier shoved Jesus with brutal force, and his weakened body crumpled to the stone-paved street, the first of his falls. The heavy cross crashed down on him, its weight pinning him to the ground. The soldiers struck him again, their voices harsh. "Get up!" With agonizing effort, Jesus rose, his body trembling under the strain. Mary and John reached him just as he fell a second time, the cross slamming into the earth with a dull thud. Mary, overcome with grief, broke through the line of soldiers and fell to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she reached out. In a voice choked with sorrow, she whispered, "I am here." Jesus lifted his bloodied face, his eyes meeting hers with a tenderness that transcended his pain. Softly, he said, "You see, Mother, I make all things new." A phrase recorded in Revelation chapter 21 verse 5 as a living prophecy of what was to unfold. The cross pressed mercilessly into his wounded back, his strength ebbing, and Jesus fell a third time, his body collapsing under the unbearable load. The soldiers whipped him, demanding he rise, but his knees buckled, no longer able to bear him. Longinus observed, his keen eyes noting every detail. He had seen countless men break under such torment, their spirits crushed long before their bodies gave out. But Jesus was different. There was an unbreakable resolve within him, a strength that defied human limits. Longinus, moved by an impulse he couldn't fully understand, grabbed a passerby, a man named Simon from the countryside, and commanded, "You there, pick up that cross," as Mark chapter 15 verse 21 mentions.
Slowly, Jesus struggled to his feet, his body racked with pain. His eyes met Simon's, and though exhausted, they conveyed a gratitude that touched the stranger's soul. As the procession resumed, Simon bore the cross, easing Jesus' burden if only slightly. The death march wound through Jerusalem's streets, a spectacle witnessed by the city. Women wailed openly, their cries mingling with the jeers of the crowd. Jesus, bloodied and near collapse, turned to them with a voice both gentle and resolute. "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep instead for yourselves and for your children," as Luke chapter 23, verse 28 confirms. Longinus, standing nearby, felt those words pierce his heart. How could a man so broken still offer compassion to others? The question gnawed at him, deepening the unease that had begun to unravel his once certain world. At last, they reached Golgotha, a barren, windswept hill reserved for Rome's grimmest spectacles. The three crosses loomed like sentinels of death, their rough wood stained with the blood of countless others. The soldiers set to work with practiced efficiency, their movements mechanical yet brutal. Jesus offered no resistance, no curses, no struggle. He stretched out his arms willingly, as if embracing his fate with a purpose beyond comprehension. The moment arrived with chilling finality. A soldier pinned his arm to the crossbeam, while another raised a heavy hammer. The first nail drove through flesh and wood, sending a cry into the heavens that made the crowd flinch. Mary shuddered, her heart breaking with each blow. John turned away, unable to bear the sight. The crowd murmured, some weeping, others continuing their mockery. Longinus stood motionless, his face a mask of stoic duty, yet his heart stirred with an unfamiliar emotion. The soldiers raised the crosses, Jesus in the center flanked by two criminals. The wooden post sank into its hole with a jarring thud, shaking Jesus' body violently. The thieves beside him screamed in agony, their voices raw with pain and fear. One of them, consumed by bitterness, glared at Jesus and taunted. "Aren't you supposed to be the Christ? Then save yourself and save us, too." But the other, his voice weak but sincere, rebuked his companion. "Don't you even fear God? Seeing that you're under the same sentence, we deserve our punishment. We're getting what our deeds deserve. But this man, he has done nothing wrong." Turning to Jesus, he whispered, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus, despite his agony, responded with a promise that would resonate through eternity. "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise," as Luke chapter 23, verse 43 states. Longinus, stationed at his post, felt a jolt at these words. He had witnessed countless executions, seen men beg and curse as death approached, but never had he encountered such grace in the face of suffering. Jesus' words carried a weight that transcended the moment, planting a seed of wonder in the centurion's heart. Time seemed to stand still as the world held its breath. The sunlight dimmed, and an oppressive darkness cloaked the land, as if creation itself mourned.
Longinus kept his vigil, his eyes fixed on Jesus, whose every movement seemed to carry profound meaning. From the cross, Jesus spoke not cries of pain, but words of forgiveness that defied the brutality around him. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing," as Luke chapter 23, verse 34 confirms. The words struck Longinus like a thunderbolt. Forgiveness for the soldiers who whipped him, the crowd that mocked him, the centurion who stood complicit in his death. Thunder rumbled in the distance, heralding an approaching storm. Caiaphas and the religious leaders, satisfied with their victory, departed, but Mary remained, her heart shattered, held gently by John. In a voice faint yet clear, Jesus spoke to her. "Woman, behold your son." Then, to John, he said, "Behold your mother," as John chapter 19, verse 26 records. As Jesus' strength waned, he let out a cry that shattered the eerie silence. My God, why have you forsaken me?"
As Mark chapter 15 verse 34 states, some in the crowd misunderstood, thinking he called for Elijah, expecting a miraculous rescue. A bystander ran, soaked a sponge with vinegar, and raised it to Jesus' lips on a reed, but Jesus refused it. Rejecting any ease for his suffering, his sacrifice demanded completion. A profound silence descended, heavy with anticipation. Jesus lifted his gaze, his eyes reflecting a resolve that transcended his pain. With his final strength, he cried, "It is finished." As John chapter 19 verse 30 confirms, heaven seemed to pause. For the last time, Jesus raised his eyes to the sky and said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." As Luke chapter 23 verse 46 records, with those words, he bowed his head and died. Suddenly, the earth responded. The ground beneath trembled violently, an earthquake shaking Jerusalem to its core. Rocks split apart, tombs burst open, and the temple veil tore from top to bottom, as Matthew chapter 27 verse 51 mentions. The crowd fell silent, their mocking faces now etched with terror. Many beat their chests, grappling with the weight of their actions. Then Longinus dropped to his knees, overwhelmed. Words poured from his lips before he could stop them, and with a trembling voice, he declared, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." As Mark chapter 15 verse 39 confirms, the centurion who had overseen the crucifixion became the first Gentile to publicly acknowledge the crucified Christ. Silence draped Golgotha like a shroud. Jesus' body hung lifeless, the air heavy with finality, disturbed by the growing unrest. The soldiers began to withdraw. The crowd, confused and fearful, scattered into the fading light. It was the preparation day for Passover, and Jewish custom forbade leaving bodies on crosses during the Sabbath. The religious leaders petitioned Pilate to break the prisoners' legs to hasten their deaths. The order reached Longinus, and he issued the command. Without hesitation, soldiers took a heavy iron bar and shattered the legs of the thieves crucified beside Jesus, their cries echoing briefly before fading. Longinus knew Jesus was already dead, but Roman protocol demanded certainty. Approaching the cross, he gripped his spear, its weight familiar in his hands. With a swift, practiced thrust, he pierced Jesus' side, and blood and water flowed out. The evangelist John, standing nearby, would later write, "And he who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, that you also may believe." As John chapter 19 verse 35 states, Longinus stared at the wound, then at his spear, now stained with sacred blood. Unknowingly, he had fulfilled the prophecy, "They will look on him whom they have pierced." As Zechariah chapter 12 verse 10 proclaims, the blood and water were a symbol, blood to redeem, water to purify. Tradition holds that the blood touched Longinus's face, miraculously restoring his vision, which had been clouded by an ailment. At the foot of the cross, beneath skies that seemed to weep, Longinus understood. He hadn't executed a mere rebel, he had pierced the Son of God. He fell to his knees again, this time as a believer, his heart forever changed. Scripture doesn't recount every moment that followed, but church tradition and ancient writings paint a vivid picture of Longinus's transformation. Shaken to his core, he couldn't return to his barracks as if nothing had happened. Sleepless nights tormented him, the image of Christ on the cross silent, still, yet radiating divine presence burning in his mind like a sacred flame. Every order he received now felt hollow, prompting questions he had never dared ask. Was he serving truth or a blind empire? Rumors began to swirl through Jerusalem, whispers that Jesus' tomb was empty. Tales of encounters with the man Longinus had seen die. He listened in silence, each story striking deep within, kindling a new fire in his soul. He knew these were no mere rumors. Something within him affirmed that death had not been the end. The memories of Golgotha haunted him not with fear, but with a holy awe. He recalled every word Jesus spoke, every glance that seemed to see through him, every silence that carried more weight than the shouts of the crowd. While Jerusalem returned to its daily rhythms, Longinus could not. The ruthless centurion he had been forged in iron and bloodshed was no more. His heart, once unyielding, began to crack under the weight of what he had witnessed. When reports reached him that Jesus had been seen alive, he felt no doubt, only a quiet, unshakable certainty. Yes, it was true, Jesus had triumphed over death. For the first time, Longinus grasped the essence of faith, the true burden of the cross, the miracle of forgiveness, and the transformative power of redemption. He made a radical choice. He resigned his commission, shed his armor, and returned his sword, walking away from the Roman army without a backward glance. Thus began his journey of faith. He sought out the disciples, those who had known Jesus intimately, and learned from the one he had once helped crucify. His name, Longinus, became known among the early believers, a symbol of radical conversion. The centurion who had once led soldiers in the name of Rome now walked barefoot, his heart ablaze, proclaiming a king he had helped send to the cross.
For years, he traveled through the regions of Cappadocia and Caesarea in what is now modern-day Turkey, preaching the name of the one he had crucified.
"I watched him die," he would say, his voice steady with conviction. "Yet in his death, I found life." His testimony carried unparalleled power, not rooted in hearsay or abstract belief, but in the raw reality of what he had seen. His words stirred hearts, drawing many to faith. The hand that once wielded a sword now lifted the gospel with fearless courage. Longinus's preaching resonated because he was no ordinary messenger. He was the centurion who had stood at the foot of the cross. But Rome did not tolerate those who abandoned its authority. Persecution soon followed. Longinus was arrested, interrogated, and beaten, his body bearing the scars of his new allegiance. His captors offered freedom in exchange for renouncing Christ. But Longinus, anchored by the peace of one who had found truth, responded with unwavering faith. Condemned as a traitor, the empire that had trained him as a soldier now sentenced him to death. They led him to a lonely hill outside the city. And there, under an open sky, he was beheaded. Longinus died a martyr, his eyes lifted upward, echoing the one who had said on the cross, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." As Luke chapter 23 verse 46 records, his body was laid to rest in Cappadocia, where local Christians soon venerated him as a saint. Reports of miracles and healings at his tomb spread, and his name endured not as an executioner, but as a witness, a believer, and a martyr. Through the centuries, the church recognized him as Saint Longinus, the one who saw, believed, and gave his life for the one who died for him first. Longinus was not alone in his mission. The apostles Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, and James carried the same message of hope and redemption, their voices echoing from Jerusalem to the farthest reaches of the known world. These 12 men, ordinary in their origins, were extraordinary in their courage, armed not with swords or armies, but with the unshakable truth of what they had witnessed. Their testimony challenged kings, shook the foundations of temples, and divided history itself. They faced persecution, imprisonment, and death. Yet their faith never wavered, for they had seen the risen Christ and knew the power of his resurrection. Their mission was not merely to build a church, but to proclaim a kingdom that transcended all earthly powers. To understand their journey, one must witness their story, brought to life in the film Apostles, displayed on the screen before you. This is not just the tale of a movement, it is the saga of how 12 humble men, fueled by faith and fortified by sacrifice, stood against the mightiest empire in history and changed the course of the world. Their legacy, like that of Longinus, is a testament to the enduring power of the cross, a symbol that turned defeat into victory. despair into hope, and death into eternal life. Watch their story and discover the fire that burned in their hearts, a fire that began on a hill called Golgotha and continues to burn in those who dare to follow.